that. Let's talk about this myth of quote unquote cheap energy. Because right now in Astoria, in the district that I represent, in frontline communities, in low income communities, in Black communities, in Latino communities, in immigrant communities, in brown communities, indigenous communities, we know that there is no such thing as cheap energy. Because the price of cheap energy has always been our lives, our health, our lungs, our cancer rates. So maybe it's cheap for someone else in a mansion that gets to breathe clean air in a nice property, but it is not cheap for the 1.2 million people in this city alone that live within striking distance of a peaker plant. We have right here in our district and in our city. And by the way, let's also talk about the fact that the economics of a peaker plant are not cheaper either. Electricity from peaker plants in New York City alone are up to 1,300% more expensive than the average cost of electricity in the rest of this state alone, let alone the rest of the country. But when you look at the proposed retirement and replacement plans for a peaker plant, people could save, ratepayers could save $1 billion in energy costs by 2035 by replacing these plants alone. And the reduced environmental and health impacts from the avoided emissions from a peaker plant could create an additional savings of another $1 billion by 2035, not nationwide, right here at home in our city. This myth of cheap energy, especially when we talk about the tragedy and the travesty of what is happening in Afghanistan right now, the amount of global conflict, the amount of lives that are given up, both in our health, both in global conflict, both in geopolitical destabilization. Oil is anything but cheap. It is the most costly fuel source that we have, with the ultimate cost being our planet and our future. So let's dispense with the myth that gas and oil and fossil fuels are cheap. They are the most costly thing that we do. And future generations do not have the opportunity here to tell us what this is costing them. So I want to start off with that note. Now, right here, let's talk about the brass tacks and the facts. According to the New York Public Service Commission, peaker plants around the city emit twice as much carbon dioxide per unit of electricity than regular power plants, and 20 times as much as nitrogen oxides. And before I go further, I want us to step back a little bit in defining the peaker plant issue as well. What are peaker plants? You know, I apologize for just diving into this. What is a peaker plant for folks following at home? During the summer and during other periods of intense power needs, when everyone, especially during a heat wave, and this situation will get worse as climate change bears on, we all need to keep cool, both for our safety, for our comfort, etc. So if you have everyone in New York City all of a sudden starting to turn on an air conditioner, for example, or across the country during a heat wave, if everyone's turning on an air conditioner, that creates a sudden load into our power systems, sudden demand. That goes and elevates beyond the average power use in a community. So what do we do? Well, for a very long time in many communities, they have decided to install what is known as peaker plants, temporary fossil fuel plants that turn on just for these times of intense energy use. And then for the rest of the time, throughout the rest of the year, they lay dormant. Fossil fuel companies and multimillionaires and billionaires, frankly, rake in because they get paid regardless. They get paid billions of dollars, about 4.5 billion just here in New York City alone, just to have the option of switching on a peaker plant. And so the argument here from the fossil fuel industry is that there is no other way. There is no other way we can solve this problem. We cannot solve or address the intensity of power demand in any other way. That there's no way that solar can do it. There's no way that any other source of renewable or clean energy can do it. That there's no way that we can address technology. There's no way we can use battery storage. And our answer to that is simply, it is not true. It's not true. We believe and we know that there is a better way. Our witnesses and our experts that are testifying here today know and understand the details of how we can do that better way. We can hear about battery storage. We can hear about community solar. We can hear about microgrids. We can hear about expanded opportunities for how we can save our planet and our city if we just loosen the grip of dark money and the fossil fuel lobby over people, loosen that grip over those in positions like mine. So that's what we're here to listen about today. And particularly in this community, in March, NRG planned to convert the Astoria peaker plants from oil burning into a natural gas facility. That's also not the way. And when we talk about reducing carbon emissions, there's a lot of funny math that goes into this from the fossil fuel industry. They want you to believe that fracking brings down carbon emissions. What they don't tell you is that it skyrockets methane emissions, which are up to 68 times more concentrated and powerful than CO2 emissions in trapping heat in our atmosphere, in our environment. So let's cut the jokes, let's cut the funny math, let's cut the tricks, and let's actually discuss how we truly solve our problem instead of using methane and carbon and really just using all of these euphemisms to save and coddle the fossil fuel industry. We need to talk about just transitions. We need to talk about how we're going to support fossil fuel workers in this transition. We need to talk about how we're going to center and repair the damage done in frontline communities in the name of quote unquote cheap gas. And we need to make sure how we chart a positive and hopeful and optimistic path for our future, because we're living with this regardless. We can either choose to suffer more or we can choose to come together and change the path of our future. And that's why we're here today. So again, I'd like to thank our witnesses. I'd like to thank our chairwoman for hosting us today. And I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you.